I want to just open the conversation by addressing, like, once again, this incredible, like, just ticklish irony to the comparing the people who are here right now, the small number of people in the room, right? The small number of people in the movement, because out of like full-time organizers, there's probably only about 200 of us, less than that even. There are a lot of people who organize with their all the time they have, but they also have to work, right, in order to support themselves. So in terms of Mr. LaRouche's movement, there's just a few hundred people, a few hundred souls that are really closely connected to this mission, all right? And yet, we intend to destroy the system of empire. We intend to destroy the British Empire. And that is the only way it's going to work. You can't talk about it any other way. You can't say, okay, well, I intend to fix the food crisis, or I'm intending to prevent the war from happening, or I intend to reverse the financial crash. None of that is going to work. None of it. Because it only is going to function if there is if there's a cadre of people. It's going to start very few, in particular from the younger generation, who can grasp what Lynn said last night about the fact that this is what I was referring to, Bill. Let me actually begin it, and you don't need to turn to these yet, but later on I'll be using them. I'm going to read from what we're going to end with. So there's a certain, poetic quality to the discussion today. These were the final comments from LaRouche last night. Here's the big problem. We have a degeneration, a moral, intellectual degeneration of the population of the United States, so that if we don't get the United States back now, the young generation coming up now will destroy the nation anyway. That's the issue. You have to do it, because if you keep this policy going on what's allowed, look, the people who were my age as a young man, they don't exist anymore to speak of. And the younger ones who aren't in that category aren't fit to lead, except very rare cases of people who actually have the guts and brains to do what's necessary. Most of our members of Congress are cowards, stinking cowards. They have no depth of commitment at all. What we have now, they are now those people who are generally gutless, and you see repeatedly with vote after vote after vote in the Congress, you have a gutless Congress, a gutless wonder assembly, not a Congress. And if we cannot now, at this point, turn the tide away from what has happened since Franklin Roosevelt died, if we can't turn that tide now, mankind may be finished. And that's what I'm concerned about. And I know I make no mistake, I make no exaggeration in any degree on this issue. I'm right. And anybody who thinks I'm not right, they're wrong. So, I want to think about what he's talking about in terms of the younger generation. Think about, because here's what we have presented before us. Pearl Harbor has been hit. All right, it's already been hit. And it's right now that people have got to be responding on that nature. LaRouche often talks about how he was in New York City on the day after Pearl Harbor, and how he saw people that the mobilization in the streets was that all of a sudden like a light went off, and people who had, like himself, who had really not intended to become a part of the fight, decided in that moment, as if simultaneously, we've got to move to preserve the nation state, to preserve humanity, and thinking about the world as a whole, because that was the identity, and that's the identity that must be forged. But this is really interesting, because that's not necessarily what could have been. That generation was defined by what Roosevelt did beginning in his first 100 days with Glass-Steagall. They were known as the lost generation. People who had no hope because of the Great Depression. and they were turned. They were transformed, right? So, and they became the people who fought fascism and won and defeated what could have been a Nazi system across the world, and that's what we're faced with today. Last Friday, LaRouche said, impeach Obama or face overt dictatorship. This is Nazi dictatorship. That's not even adequate at all. Right now, there is genocide taking place on the planet, and Obama's at fault. And anyone who thinks it's not happening, it better get their head out of the ground, because all you have to do is look at Haiti. And we're going to go into that. There's some very striking things on this that everyone should know. Consider what's going on with the ethanol. This just as an aside, really, because it's crucial, but let's just address it momentarily. 40% of our corn is going into the gas tanks. All right. So, first of all, what is the result of that? Well, there's about 1 billion people on the planet who are hungry. All right. The amount of corn that we turn into ethanol could be immediately transformed to food. It could be used as food, and we could feed 400 million people with it. This is calculations that Dennis Mason has done recently. So then you have to ask yourself, well, why on earth are we doing it? And there was a reference to this last, maybe 2 weeks ago. We were at a hearing where the EPA was, Obama's EPA was commenting. And a congressman said, well, at what point, when the food crisis gets so bad, what point do you plan on issuing a waiver on the biofuels requirements? And a response from the EPA, at what point in time would you lift the biofuels requirement and allow that food to be used as food? Right? And the response was, oh, we don't have a plan. There was never a plan. There's not a plan. So what's the intention? The intention is genocide. It's starvation. It's death. It's famine. It's not famine caused by circumstance, by natural disasters, by climate change. It's man-made. It's man-made murder. Now take a moment and reflect that the Congress knows it. The Congress, and the exit sign is flashing. Impeach, impeach, impeach. All right? Why? Why is that such a crucial move? All right, well, who in the room happened to be able to be on the Monday night call that Jeff Steinberg made, or listen to it later? This was the emergency conference call. I know Bruce got to listen to it. James, you're on it? Okay, very good. I strongly urge everyone to listen to it. It has been sent out to you as an MP3 form, so you can look in your email from Bob Wesser, I expect, or perhaps from Stu Rosenblatt, if you have access to your email. If you have any other issues on that, I'm sure we can find another way. And in fact, it's on the LaRouche PAC website. So if you can access the LaRouche PAC website and you search for Jeffrey Steinberg briefing of, what was the date? Monday the 10th, June 10th. Then you'll be able to listen to it. It's about an hour, a little bit longer. But he opens with this tremendous revelation. He said, only 3 or 4 people in the world knew this up until this point in time. Only a few people, myself, Mr. LaRouche, and a couple of other people who had to know. At the same time that LaRouche made his famous April 11th, 2009 webcast saying Obama is a Hitler, Obama is an Emperor Nero, at the same time that he said that, there was a parallel identification, a psychological assessment of the president that said, clinically, agreed clinically with what Mr. LaRouche said. Because the whole point is that he's a malignant narcissist. So that's someone who cannot think from the standpoint of another person. It's like impossible for them to imagine what it would be like to be another person. They only see themselves everywhere. And further, the point of being a malignant narcissist is that they hate themselves. And you can see this. I mean, everyone has seen it, but you can really see it in Obama's mannerisms. And he goes up there and he'll say something that is just totally brutal and disgusting. And and he hates himself for it. So he said the intelligence community, some faction within the intelligence community, already came to the same conclusion in April of 2009. So this Jeff used to frame the situation with the scandals. Because here's the concatenation of scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal that are hitting Obama left and right and up and down. And it's not a coincidence. This is a coordinated effort by figures within the patriotic institutions of the presidency, because there are people in the United States government, in the institutions, the military, etc., the intelligence community, who do have a patriotic response. And if you go back to the 1970s, these people picked up LaRouche as a thinker, as a creative mind, because they saw that his outlook was that of Roosevelt and Kennedy. These are people who were defined by their, for example, in the military, by their love and respect for MacArthur, right? By the fact that they recognize if we had listened to MacArthur, if Kennedy had not been killed, we wouldn't have gone into the Vietnam War, and we would have escaped the whole situation in many respects, right? If Kennedy had survived, we would have actually crushed the empire by those policies. So over the past recent period, Obama gets reelected. These guys who thought somehow perhaps we could escape this, somehow, because this is the whole problem that LaRouche continually points out to us, that people can't forecast what's going to happen, so they think, well, but I could get through this, or the country can get through this. It's like, let's just see what happens. Maybe we can get Romney in, and he's more controllable. Whatever it is that they thought, right? But he specifically said that a faction of people who are against his reelection are acting. So they act. I mean, I don't need to enumerate the scandals. There's really no point doing that. But the point is that we have reached a boundary condition. Obama can no longer boss around everyone this way and that in the Congress and threaten them and blackmail them because he's lost credibility. Now, this week there was a press conference held, and at this press conference you had the ACLU, Rand Paul, a whole swath of other Republican congressmen, Tea Party types, many of them, right? And Bruce Fine, who I'd say probably everyone here, with maybe a couple of exceptions, has seen speak publicly at a LaRouche event, right? Or at least you've seen the video, right? Bruce Fine, who's spoken at Schiller Institute conferences at least 3-4 times now over the past year, going back to, over the past 6 months, really, going back to January. And then, of course, he was involved with our press conference back on Benghazi, right? So the situation here is that we have a core of people who come together at this press conference to announce that it's not politics, it's principle, to announce the spying is indicating this is not unconstitutional, this is anti-constitutional. Bruce Fine raised the fact that we waged, and much of the revolution was much of the construction of the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, was created because of the very general warrants that Obama is using today, and that Bush used, right? Well, I can just look at everyone's information, because you can trust me, just trust me. I know, you can. Don't worry, I'm just going after the bad guys. Okay, so they moved this week. Now, who else was at this press conference? John Conyers. So in the Senate, John Conyers, for anyone who might not know, is the most senior member of the Congress, as I understand it, and he's a FDR Democrat, and his father was actually served under FDR in the Congress. Okay, so Conyers actually joined together with Tea Party Republicans, and now there's a bill in the House and a bill in the Senate that is supported by the Senate. I believe it's the Senate bill that's Rand Paul, and the House bill is John Conyers, right?
It's Amish, I think.
Yeah, Amish, whatever. Okay, thank you. So Amish or Amash, he's the AMASH. He's a Michigan guy. I think he's Tea Party. Anyway, the point is that these guys, you have a bipartisan, nonpartisan recognition that we have to move. They announced not just that, but a lawsuit that's being launched by the ACLU with Rand Paul's support, in particular, with all of these people's support, against the NSA on this question of the spying. The bills in the House are to restore the Fourth Amendment. That's what they're called. ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, right? So these guys are very defined as
They've also asked every
leftist.
American to join the suit.
Rand Paul announced he wants to get at least 10 million Americans to join the suit, so a class action suit, right? Because the ACLU is they use Verizon Wireless, so they say their argument is, look, all of our our work depends on confidentiality with congressmen, and the obvious point is this: look, overt dictatorship. What does that mean? Well, it means Obama, the executive branch, is spying on the congressmen and the Supreme Court. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Now, if they don't stand up against this, then that's it. Then there's nothing that could possibly be done to prevent to mobilize these people. There's nothing. Then they've laid down and they've accepted it. So that was the crucial point from last night's webcast. Okay, is the cowardice, the guts. It's the guts that's the most essential, and that means standing up against empire. It's the guts to say that our intention is to crush the British Empire. It's the guts to go for the real root of the problem: the British Queen, the European oligarchy, the Dutch monarchy. That's essential. That's what it takes guts. You need it's just not going to happen without guts, because the Congress is a bunch of stinking cowards. Okay, so I want to move sort of more rapidly forward, but let me reference the obvious sort of other things that are playing out in the past couple of days. Okay, first of all, the financial system is dead. We knew that, but the thing is rapidly crashing. Okay, because we've reached a certain point, which perhaps, we'll have to go through this next week because we're not going to have time today, but we have to do it. We have to return to LaRouche's typical collapse function and look at this again, because we've reached the final stage where the quantitative easing, the money printing, right, the increasing of that part of the curve has reached a certain shock front, where from here on out, all of the money printing is only going to accelerate the collapse of the financial system, of the financial aggregates, right? Because what's happening right now is there's a shift in the Congress. There's a total shift. We had all these different lines over the past years, right? Oh, let's wait. We got to wait and see about Dodd-Frank, right? And then they say, well, they're never going to let it happen. And then just starting about a week and a half ago, the new line is, you cannot discuss Glass-Steagall because it could cause the markets to collapse. This is the line that came out of Washington, D.C. this week. Don't even talk about Glass-Steagall. We're not going to let any discussion happen on this, because if you talk about doing such a real financial reform, we know that it's not any kind of monetary reform. This is a matter of changing the entire culture. This is a matter of changing the very concept of what money is, that is essential to what is the American system versus the empire system. All right. We know that this represents a total phase shift into a period of growth such as the United States has never seen before. But the people that we're running into on this are saying, well, the system, the system is so fragile that we can't talk about doing anything like that right now because it could burst.
That's why it's more important to talk about it if it's so fragile.
Well, you understand that. But you got to do it as though in a war, okay? Because we have to win the war. And if we don't win, there's going to be mass genocide.
You won't have to worry about the system, there'll be no system.
There will be mass genocide. So so that's one thing of note, because what Steinberg's comment, I believe, is there's probably a major financial institution that has gone under that is currently being covered up in whatever way possible. That they're currently burying the body right now, but it's gonna come out of the grave rapidly. So, okay, so similarly, we have the move by the Obama administration. This is not a coincidence. It is put together by Tony Blair, and currently today, David Cameron, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and William Hague, who's the Foreign Minister of the United Kingdom. Bill Hague, he visited Washington, D.C., visited the White House. The next day, Obama announces, we're going to fund and we're going to arm the rebels, right? The Syrian rebels, the Al-Qaeda rebels. We're going to arm the people who just recently, just brutally murdered a 16-year-old who identified himself as an atheist, right? Amongst a list of war crimes of atrocities that I couldn't possibly go into today, right? So there's been a major reaction against that. You know, you might have read in this morning's New York Times, there was something that said, after arming Syrian rebels, then what? What's the strategic question? What's the follow-through on this? But I want to return to the essential factor here, which is that we have to change how people think. How people think. And you're watching that happening right now, because the people who are moving with the scandals, or like Zbigniew Brzezinski yesterday, who was from the Carter administration, the National Security Advisor, he said, I don't know what's the strategic objective here in arming the rebels. I don't know what is he thinking? What's the point of this, right?
I was going to say that. What is the point?
This is the fact that that people are thinking this way means that they're thinking about the consequences. And they're essentially now admitting as best as they could, explicitly as they possibly could, LaRouche is right. Our president is dangerous, and we are on the edge of world war because of this. They define it in the press as regional war, but anyone with a strategic mind at all realizes that regional war today in the Middle East means world war, right? So it's almost an unspoken, a clear danger, the next step, right? But the point is that people are shifting. The reason you get rid of Obama is not because of what he's done, it's because of what he will do. And when you think on that basis of forecasting, then you could actually save the nation state. Now, forecasting is something that can only be done by a creative human mind. You can't do it if you believe in sense certainty. You can't do it if you think that the future is merely a gamble. It's just a roll of the dice. And that's empire. And I'm going to go through that later in terms of the creation of the Dutch Empire, where they first created, this was a period where they first created what we know today as financial derivatives. They were created in the mid-1600s in Amsterdam and Antwerp, and there was this is where in the same period, you had the creation of the first publicly owned casinos, state-owned casinos in Venice, where they created for the first time you had gambling houses on mass scales, right? And Galileo, in fact, I'm going to give you guys, everyone should have a copy. I think Finn needs a copy, Fred, of the material. But anyway, of a chapter from a book by Bob Ingram, who's one of our people in San Francisco, who wrote a book on the modern Anglo-Dutch Empire, in which he goes through the fact that they even got Galileo to write a treatise on gambling, and treat it as though it was some kind of science, right? And that's the basic insanity. People think that there's no such thing as the mind. They think there's only the brain. Then that is the evil of empire, is to enforce on people an idea that human reason doesn't even exist, that all there is sense perception. All there is you can't possibly, how could you think about the future being something real? I can't touch the future, I can't see the future, I can't feel the future, I can't hear it, so therefore it can't possibly exist. Okay, so if I could just, I'm going a little bit over, so I want to make sure that we move forward on this. But, okay, if you wouldn't mind picking this up.
Which one?
It's the one that starts with, from the LaRouche Pack Weekly Report of June 12th, 2013. Now, I created this document because there are a lot of things that I won't necessarily be able to go into today. So I'll read excerpts from it, and we'll look at it, in an excerpted way, but I want you to have it so you can look at it later. And the same is true of the other packet that I gave you. Do you have one, Vicky?
Oh, no, I'm trying to find it.
I think Vicky needs a copy. Anyone else?
I don't know.
You don't? Okay, then Marie Louise needs a copy too. And then I guess Howard. Hey, Howard. Okay, so this is from a weekly report this week, which for anyone who doesn't know, this is the weekly program on science on scientific research being done every day by LaRouche's scientific research team called The Basement. So every Wednesday they do a report on what's cooking, right? Because what we're engaged in is a massive scientific revolution to destroy the ideologies of sense certainty, of the belief in sense certainty per se, that dominate our cultural, political, scientific, economic system. All right? And I highly recommend you watch this one because it has some really key reports from Michael Kirsch. I mean, I referenced at the outset Haiti. He talks about the fact that in Haiti, where if we had followed LaRouche's plan in 2010 following the earthquake, we would have protected the people. This is another point from last night. What is our responsibility? We protect the people of our nation state, and we protect the people of the globe. That's what Americans do. That's who we are. So if we had done that, then they would have adequate housing, they'd have adequate food, they'd have protection from the hurricane. Right now they are scrambling currently to put away food reserves to prepare for the hurricane system. All right, the hurricane season, excuse me. In the meanwhile, there's just a dramatic increase in malnutrition. 2/3 of Haitians cannot get the food that they require without the help of some aid service, some foreign aid, as I understand it. All right, perhaps not only foreign, but anyway, but from some kind of charity service, right? And there's a large percentage, smaller than 2/3, but there's a large percentage that are literally starving to death. Okay, and what they're doing, and this is what we're dealing with. This is evil. This is the evil of empire. Okay, there are people in Haiti right now. What they do is they take mud, they take dirt, and they mix it with butter or oil, and then they put it in the sun and they let it bake, and then they take it and they sell it in the streets. And people eat mud pies or dirt pies so that they don't feel hungry, so they at least have something. That's what's going on right now. That's what's going on right now. I mean, similarly, look, and it's just this is what's happening. But forget about the predicates, because any possible story I could tell you one that's 10 times worse. You have to look top down. We have to destroy the British Empire. That's his point. If you look at I'm just going to get forward to the second page. If you could turn to the second page, I highly recommend you read this transcript later. But get to the second page, and you see the little page break, and then you have LaRouche in the middle of the page. See, the danger today, when you start to pick secondary issues, which are spin-offs of the thing which have to be dealt with, you got to look at your basic motivation. Are you going to destroy the British Empire? That's your question. One question. Not a lot of details, because you're not going to win by saying we can do this, plus this, plus this, plus this. Yes, we're going to do it, but we're going to do it as a United States, not under this kind of influence. So we're going to destroy the British Empire. And if we're not willing to do that, we are going to be destroyed, either by this system, which the British Queen, who is now not in the best condition, apparently she's getting sick, but her tendency in the British Empire it's been the Anglo-Dutch system. We have to destroy the Anglo-Dutch system as a power. And if you're not talking about it in those terms, you will never discover the means and instruments by which you can save the United States. All these other things are subsidiary features of what we must do to defend the United States in terms of our national interest. We also have a world interest as Americans. We are concerned about what happens to the world as a whole. We're not foolish. But we know this thing that the Queen represents must be destroyed. And if you try to take it down into constituent elements, you lose. Because you have to have a war plan. That doesn't mean we're going to war. It means we're going to do the same thing you do in a war. We're going to crush the British Empire. And that's the only thing that will do any damn good. Now, as an aside, let me just say that this is the point that I put to a bunch of people I met in Albany last Tuesday. The revelations that Snowden did, I met a bunch of young people, the revelations that Snowden brought forward as a 29-year-old, he took leadership. This is tremendous. Right? To against tyranny for the generations that come after. He's very explicit about this. But what's the difference in terms of what we're doing now? This is all good. But what needs to happen now is we need to crush the bastards. We have to we have to destroy them. And that's Glass-Steagall. And it means we got to do it immediately. We have to do it right away. It should happen this week. It should happen immediately. All right? So that's what I put to people, and that's what they responded to. No one wants to hear, like, oh, I've got a good idea. We don't need good ideas. We need to crush the enemy. That's the only way it's going to work. So I think that sort of sets the stage for in terms of what Scott and I want to go through today. Right? Because the question is, what are the... I mean, I was just struck last night after the webcast. We have such power. We are tremendously powerful. We are tremendously powerful. I mean, you look at... Yeah. You look at when you watch LaRouche on that dais with that, saying what he said last night, and you can actually, and if you read this new paper, because this is really the crucial question. LaRouche wrote a new paper. He said, this is the most important scientific document I have ever done. This is my most important scientific work of my whole life. And my most important piece of work generally. So that's pretty good. That's pretty dramatic. And we just began discussing it. I mean, members of the organization over the past week, with people that we're talking to, that we're organizing, and right here today, that's what we're discussing. He stressed, yep.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
I thought about this a little while ago. I had been watching one of the earlier reports called Who We Fight. I don't know if you remember that. And part of it, MacArthur talks about I'm not sure if it was about Inchon, but he was talking about, well, how do you break the enemy? You cut off their lines of supply. And that's what Glass-Steagall does. Because what you do is you take the enemy's lines of supply, which is, all the financial capability it's got, and you cut it off. And you redirect it towards what we need to do, which is rebuild the economy. So it's a war strategy.
Absolutely, yeah. And to use it, to define it, to completely change the geometry of what our economy is, and to begin such that we increase our power economically to the extent that's necessary to crush them once and for all.
I was going to ask, what did LaRouche have to say about Edward Snowden, the so-called whistle?
Well, let me...
And also
yeah.
about the hacking
sure.
that's going on between the U.S. and China.
Yeah. Well, I think what I was able to put to these young people is the question. I mean, the important factor is there's a potential for a revolt in the Congress. We saw parts of it. There's a potential, but LaRouche's point is forget about all the nonsense about all the like the little things here and there. That's not the issue. The issue is the cowardice in the Congress. The issue is the cowardice generally. He went even so far last night as to say something that you haven't heard him say in so many words recently, which is that if the Congress isn't going to do it, the Supreme Court better stand up and do it.
Will they?
I don't have much.
But that's the question. That is the question, because who's responsible for them doing it?
All of us.
So that's it, and that's what this work is all about: is how are we going to crush the empire? That's what he's done. Is he's put it together. He's put it right there, and it's the subjective question. You see, it's about the intention. It's not about the various strategies. There's no general that ever won the war without figuring out how he was going to win the war first. You figure out how you're going to win. You don't think to yourself, well, let me do a little bit on this side and a little bit on that side, and I'll cover my bases. You have to win. And that means we got to crush them. But what LaRouche says emphatically in this and in the new document is, what does it mean? He develops a concept of what does it mean to have this intention? What is that intention? To crush the empire. And it has everything to do with destroying the belief in sense certainty. Is everything to do, and we're gonna go through this. It's gonna be very patently clear, but emphatically, first of all, who is the empire? What have they done? You know, because they've done this all before. It's nothing new. It's absolutely nothing new, right? So there's a couple things that I'm going to go through here on, because what Scott and I got together is we said, okay, well, we got to do something on the British Empire, and what we got to do is make it clear that this is how it operates. This is how empire operates. This is the whole thing, and I think that there's two ways to talk about this that are the sort of crucial leverage points for this whole discussion today. One is, Americans always knew. We always knew that it was the empire in those moments when we were fighting, and we're truly fighting. And we always knew that the threat was a threat of destruction, of depopulation. I've got something tremendous in here that I'm going to end with the first section that goes back to Benjamin Franklin. Okay, but it's known. We know. And so to return to the next thing, okay, so you go to Henry Carey's Harmony of Interests, next thing in the document, and just turn to the part where on the third page that is highlighted, okay? Because here's the point: there's no middle ground. Americans always knew it. It's either you go with the empire or you do an American system. There's no middle ground. It's one or the other. There's two systems. This is a very famous quote in our movement. People should probably know it, but I'm just going to go, well, John Paul, I know you probably haven't read this before. Go ahead. Can you read it out loud? Just the highlighted part.
Two systems are before the world. The one looks to increasing the proportion of persons and of capital engaged in trade and transportation. Therefore, to diminishing the proportion engaged in producing commodities with which to trade, with necessarily diminished returns to the labor of all, while the other looks to increasing the proportion engaged in the work of production and diminishing that engaged in trade and transportation, with increased return to all, giving to the laborer good wages and to the owner of capital good profits.
Okay, so let me parse that real quickly. But there's two systems. He's talking about the British system and the American system, the empire system and the American system. One is geared towards increasing the productivity of the economy as a whole and the economies of the world. The other one is geared towards decreasing the production, towards shutting it down and to creating profits. Right? Okay. Can you go to the? I mean, please read the whole thing. It's much richer, but go to the next part if you would.
One looks to increasing the necessity for commerce, the other to increasing the power to maintain it. One looks to underworking the Hindu and sinking the rest of the world to his level, the other to raising the standard of man throughout the world to our level. One looks to pauperism ignorance, depopulation, and barbarity. The other increasing wealth, comfort, intelligence, combination of action, and civilization. One looks towards universal war, the other towards universal peace. One is the English system, the other we may be proud to call the American system. For it is the only one ever devised the tendency of which was that of elevating while equalizing the condition of man throughout the world.
This was 1851. For those who don't know, Henry Carey became Lincoln's closest economic advisor. He's I think, the first person to refer to the American system as the American system. I may be wrong on that, but he's crucial in the actions that Lincoln took, right, to fight the empire. Okay, but I pulled this quote because that's a point that is essential here. There's no middle ground. We can't go into this and say we're going to, sometimes I remember hearing people say, well, with Glass-Steagall, if you want to speculate, you can speculate, but you can't do it with other people's money, so we're not saying speculation is all speculation is bad and blah, 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 right? That's a really propitiatory way to talk about it, and it's not going to win the war. That's not the point. The point is we're going to destroy Wall Street. We're going to shut them down. We're going to shut down because Wall Street is the arm in the United States of the Anglo-Dutch Empire. Okay, so we're not going to mince words about it. We shut them down. Glass-Steagall is not something that's legalistic. It's a move, it's a war move, it's a flank, it's the flank to cut off their supply lines, to cut off their very lifeblood, because the lifeblood is speculation. Now I really love this quote, I've been using it a lot, from George Washington. He said, he wrote this in letters, I forget exactly to whom. He said, the speculators, this black gentry, their poison is 1,000 times more harmful to us than the enemy's arms. And he suggested we should hang them from a gallows 5 times the height of Haman's gallows. Now Haman is the biblical king who said he was going to hang, hang the Jews from a gallows that was 50 feet high.
He was like a Hitler of that time.
Well, the point is, Washington says that's what they deserve upon their own head, 5 times over. Right? This is Washington on speculators, right? So think about that for a moment. And then, I mean, that's something we have to develop, this total hard edge, this total war stance. Because we have everything lined up to get it done, but we're not going to get it done unless we transform into something of a higher quality today. And we commit to something that is a far greater responsibility than many people are willing to admit. Because look, I mean, even if the financial system does not blow within the next couple of months, we're going to run out of food. We're not going to have enough food to feed our people by the end of the year. This is the forecast LaRouche has been emphatic on. Okay. So let me change this up a little bit and give you a little bit more humor on this, because we do need a biting satire, right? And then I'm going to turn it over to Scott in a few minutes here. But in front of you have a method of humbling rebellious American vassals. And this is a satirical article written by Benjamin Franklin in 1774. Okay?
The other paper?
No, it's the same one. Just turn the page. 1774. And he's writing as though in the voice of a British freeholder. Okay? A British lord, essentially. And then he says, this is it's like a modest proposal, and I'm going to return to that because that's very important, the Jonathan Swift satirical essay. He says, he's talking about the problem of the vassals, the rebellious vassals of North America, these colonial, these colonial rebels. As we have declared by our representatives that we are the supreme lords of their persons and property, and they're occupying our property at such a remote distance without a proper control from us, except at very great expense, it encourages a mutinous disposition. these American rebels, and may, if not timely prevented, dispose them in perhaps less than a century to deny our authority, slip their necks out of the collar, and from being slaves set up for masters, more especially when it is considered that they are robust, hardy people, encourage early marriages, and their women, being amazingly prolific, they must of consequence in 100 years be very numerous, and of course be able to set us at defiance. Remember, this is from the standpoint of a British lord, so the lord is saying, they're going to they're going to overpopulate, they're going to become strong and mighty, they're going to, if we don't, and with this defiant disposition. So here's the solution. Let a company of sowgelders. Now, a sowgelder, where anyone who doesn't know, is someone who clips the balls off of a pig. Excuse me. Who castrates pigs, right? That's what gelding is. And let a company of sowgelders, consisting of 100 men, accompany the army. On their arrival at any town or village, let orders be given that on the blowing of the horn, all the males be assembled in the marketplace. If the corps are men of skill and ability in their profession, they will make great dispatch, and retard but very little the progress of the army. There may be a clause in the bill to be left at the discretion of the general, whose powers ought to be very extensive, that the most notorious offenders, such as Hancock, Adams, etc., who have been ringleaders in the rebellion of our servants, should be shaved quite close. But that none of the offenders may escape in the town of Boston. Let all the males there suffer the latter operation, as it will be conformable to the modern maxim that is now generally adopted by our worthy constituents: it is better that 10 innocent persons should suffer than that one guilty should escape. So this is how we're going to solve the American problem. We'll just clip their balls off. And he continues. I really like this on the next page. He said, the advantages arising from this scheme being carried into the execution are obvious. In the course of 50 years, it is probable we shall not have one rebellious subject in North America. This will be laying the axe to the root of the tree. In the meantime, a considerable expense may be saved to the managers of the opera, and our nobility and gentry be entertained at a cheaper rate by the fine voices of our own castrati, and the specie remain in the kingdom, which now to an enormous amount is carried every year to Italy. So for anyone who doesn't know, the castrati were the opera singers who were castrated. And it might likewise be of service to our Levant trade, as we could supply the grand signors Seraglio and the harems of the grandees of the Turkish dominions with cargoes of eunuchs, as well as with handsome women, for which America is as famous as Circassia. So that's so Franklin was writing this. Now, okay, this is like pretty funny, but Franklin's writing this in the context of the British imperial genocide in India, which has taken place over the course of the same period, where they literally, because of famine policies, and rather than go into this in depth, I'll just have to make it available to people, but because of famine policies, right, policies of killing people off by taxing them, for example, making people in India only grow cash crops and making them hand over 60% of their income, and it had to be in gold, so they had to sell their stuff first, all this business. They caused huge famines. And the first famine of note, the first famine in 1770, which was a result of massive destruction of the people. Well, the people, they thought that these policies were being enacted by the Mughal emperor, because the Mughal emperor was being maintained as a satrap, right? As someone who was of the local area, and was the nominal head of the country, but in fact he was just a puppet, right? He was just an Obama. He was just a puppet of the British, right? So the peasants thought this was coming from the emperor. They thought they were giving tribute to the legitimate emperor, right? This led to a third of the population being killed in 2 years. 10 million Indians were killed in the space of 2 years. A third of the population just vanished. And I mean, that's not a proper way to talk about it. When you talk about just vanish, I mean, think about the people in Haiti right now, and think about what starvation is. Starvation is, as I understand it, one of the absolute worst deaths. It causes unspeakable pain and suffering. And meanwhile, you're watching the whole society go through this. You can imagine what that does, because the whole point is that the empire treats people like farm animals and enforces an empire of the mind that gets the subjects to believe that they're nothing more than farm animals. To act in a model of animal activity, as the Wall Street figures do today. As the Wall Street swindlers do today. They act like nothing more than animals. That's the force of the empire, is to get people to... Now, it's degradation of the culture, it's degradation of the economy. When everyone around you is starving, it becomes extremely difficult to think at all, to be creative at all. Right? So, just to keep that in mind. Now, in the meantime, this is 1774. 1773, in The Alarm, which was a colonial American broadside, here was a comment from Rusticus, who was this is a pseudonym for some, I have the only copy on this. Are we in like manner to be given up to the disposal of the East India Company, who have now the assurance to step forth in aid of the minister to execute his plan of enslaving America? Their conduct in Asia for some years past has given simple proof how little they regard the laws of nations, the rights, liberties, or laws of men. Now let me emphasize again that the 1770 famine that killed 10 million people, it was orchestrated starting in 1765. This is not something that took a long time. They started the whole treaty that set up the satrapy as it was, and set up these famine policies was 1765. So within 5 years, they have planned, they execute, they achieve a program to mass murder a third of the population. Their conduct in Asia for some years past has given simple proof how little they regard the laws of nations, the rights, liberties, or lives of men. They have levied war, excited rebellions, dethroned lawful princes, and sacrificed millions for the sake of gain. The revenue of mighty kingdoms have centered in their coffers, and these not being sufficient to glut their avarice, they have, by most unparalleled barbarities, extortions, and monopolies, stripped the miserable inhabitants of their property, and reduced whole provinces to indigence and ruin. 1,500,000, it is said, perished by famine in 1 year. You can imagine talking about millions back then. They didn't have any, so 1.5 million. 1.5 million. No, what am I off? It's 15 million, excuse me. Not because they perished by famine in 1 year. Not because the earth denied its fruits, but because this company, the British East India Company, and their servants engulfed all the necessaries of life and set them at so high a rate that the poor child could not purchase them. Thus, having drained the sources of the immense wealth, they now, it seems, cast their eyes on America as a new theater whereon to exercise their talents. Rusticus ended one of his pamphlets with the following admonition: I shall therefore conclude with a proposal that your watchmen be instructed as they go on their rounds to call out every night at 12:30, beware of the East India Company. Now imagine, he's saying that's the message. Americans got to know the British East India Company, the British Empire, the Anglo-Dutch Empire is the enemy. Rusticus knows it. So with that, let me hand it over to Scott.
Well, when Daniel and I started taking this up, we said, we got to take up Lynn's directive, and Americans have to remember who the enemy is. That you've got this system raining down right now of globalization. It's totally un-American, and it's going to kill you. It's going to kill Americans, it's going to kill the world, unless we get Glass-Steagall, And getting Glass-Steagall means Americans have to remember who the enemy is again. Tony Blair is not your friend. The British government is not your friend. But, so we were looking at different case studies. And you have the Irish potato famine of 1845 to about 1850. That caused mass immigration from Ireland, mass starvation there, but also mass immigration into the United States of Irish who ended up fighting on the side of the Union, but also the Confederacy, but mainly the Union because of where their port of entry was. But knowing who the enemy was at the time, like Lincoln fighting the Civil War against the Confederacy, knowing it was a British operation. And we didn't bring them today, but there's these great songs from the two Irish brigades that fought on the side of the North. That it's very clear that they understand that the fight against the Confederacy is the fight against the British Empire to come in and subdue the United States. So where has that gone? Where is that sense of identity in the United States of Americans to know your enemy? Where's the sense of mission? Where has it gone? Now, this idea of famine is kind of a misnomer. It's a rewriting of history in the sense that when you had a problem with the potato crop in Ireland, it wasn't as if there was some drought and that's what caused the potatoes to fail, and that's what caused all the other food to fail. There was actually plenty of food being produced in Ireland. It was all being exported out under the guard of British troops, 50,000 British troops. So, just to give some background on this, I appreciated the reference to Swift that Daniel went through, because I think about 1688 you had William of Orange come in, and he was known as the Butcher of Ireland. But for hundreds of years, Ireland had been conquered before this. 1688 comes in, and you have these penal laws that were introduced. So this is just going to kind of setting the stage of what the condition of the Irish people were under the dominion of the British, but also obviously the Dutch Empire. In broad outline, the penal laws barred Catholics from the army and navy, the law, commerce, and from every civic activity. No Catholic could vote, hold any office under the crown, or purchase land, and Catholic estates that had existed were dismembered by an enactment directing that at the death of a Catholic owner, his land was to be divided among all his sons unless the eldest became a Protestant, when he could inherit the whole. Education was made almost impossible, since Catholics might not attend schools, nor keep schools, nor send their children to be educated abroad. The practice of the Catholic faith was prescribed, outlawed. Informing on Catholics was encouraged as an honorable service, and priest hunting treated as a sport. Such were the main provisions of the penal code described by Edmund Burke as a machine as well fitted for the oppression, impoverishment, and degradation of a people, and the debasement in them of human nature itself, as ever proceeded from the perverted ingenuity of man. Now, the thing about this is that the penal laws were enacted. You have William of Orange, 1688. Penal laws are in the 1690s sometime. But during the 18th century, there was a little bit of a shift in Ireland. And this was directly related to the circles of Jonathan Swift and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. They organized. And what they did is they had established manufacturers in linen, glass, clothing, whatnot, but the idea of industrializing Ireland. And at this time, Swift is all, how many people here have read the Graham Lowry book, How the Nation Was Won? It's real crucial, because you get this sense of this transatlantic conspiracy and correspondence between Swift and people in the Virginia colony, Governor Spotswood there, I think even Governor Hunter in New York, I'm not sure, but the idea of breaking free of the British control of the colonies and moving for the development, west past the mountains. The famous place that Governor Spotswood and his party eventually broke through in Virginia was called the Swift Run Gap, and it's an illusion. It's not clear, but it's obvious that where this comes from. Right, the Catholics couldn't own land, but so you had these absentee landlords that came in, or Scottish landlords, British landlords. But Swift and Leibniz's circles began organizing for development on the land. Probably irrigation, certain things like the clearing of bogs, the draining of bogs for increased land agriculture. And eventually what this led to was a joint movement between Catholics and Protestants that culminated in a constitution in 1782, during the time of the American Revolution. So what happens is the British hit back, and William Petty, the second Lord of Shelburne, and this Prime Minister William Pitt, they're brought in basically on the heels of the American Revolution to deal with this strategic loss to the empire of the North American colonies. And if anyone's ever read Lynn's So You Wish to Learn All About Economics, he describes this carriage ride that's described in the family history of William Petty, of where he gets Adam Smith to write this book, The Wealth of Nations, as a propaganda tract against what Hamilton and Washington were doing here in the United States with a credit system, a national bank. You promote this idea of free trade. And what you see is it was exactly this free trade, this rigid cult belief in private ownership, no government interference, that not only created the conditions of the potato famine, but once the famine hit, it's how a genocide was enforced upon the Irish people. There was no government help whatsoever. So, 1782, you have a constitution in Ireland, and things are looking good. The population between 1782 and 1845 had actually increased 172% in Ireland. And you can imagine that this was this Ben Franklin quote that Daniel had read, this problem of population increase. The Irish never submitted to British rule, but now you've got these hordes of them that are growing, and they have a basic economy that they're working with. So William Pitt, in the same way that you get these young Europe revolutions later with Lord Palmerston, and I have to look more into this, but there was an Irish uprising in 1798 that the British then came in and crushed, that William Pitt had actually been involved in creating. It was called a young Europe, a young Ireland movement. And it wasn't a very effective uprising, but what it did is it gave the British the excuse to come in, crush the rebellion, and enact the Act of Union in 1801, which abolished the Constitution, and it brought Ireland completely under the rule of the British, and it established this free trade zone between the Irish and the British. And the idea was, well, isn't this great? Now the Irish are incorporated into the British economy, there's freedom of trade, this is going to be wonderful. And it turned out, obviously, as you know, the exact opposite. Because what happened is those manufacturers that had existed in Ireland at the time were all wiped out by surplus British products, British goods that were just dumped cheaply in there. Then what you had with land use after the Act of Union is that 80% of the land in Ireland was foreign owned, either by Scottish landlords or British landlords, most of whom were not there, most of whom called absentee landlords. 25% of all the land was just completely unused, except that in the London markets there was real estate speculation on it. 75% of the land that was used was purely for export of grain or cattle and horses that were grazed upon this land, exported out, and it was all controlled by London merchants. So, what did this do to the Irish people? Their rents went up under these landlords. Everything that they grew went to paying the rent. 2 million of the Irish people didn't even sell the food that they were growing, the wheat and the oats and the barley and the milk and the dairy that they were creating. But it just went directly to the landlord, just so that they could stay on this plot of land and eke out an existence with these potatoes, which, granted, the potatoes are a pretty amazing thing, pretty amazing crop. It's what kept the Irish alive, because in terms of land area, it takes a lot less land to grow potatoes to feed people and keep them alive than, say, grain or something else, density. But the problem is this is all that the Irish were living on. It was potatoes and water, basically, or maybe some milk. Potato soup, yeah.
No, the onions.
You can. There's only so much creativity you can base off of a potato. No, but there were reports of like, the Irishmen that worked, and these potatoes did keep them alive. It was like 12 to 15 pounds of potato a day per person, morning, noon, and night. And let me just read some of the conditions here. Oh well, let me just read this in terms of the British troops coming in, the army, to enforce the Act of Union. This is from a book called The Great Hunger by a woman named Cecil Woodham Smith, and she's actually attacked among like Irish academia because I think this is written in 49, but she talks about the exporting of food out of Ireland by the army, and that was kind of a no-no because it was just a famine, it was just a blight, it was just a potato problem. But she says constitutional methods having failed, as armed rebellion had previously failed, Ireland relapsed into helpless hostility. No outbreak took place in 1844, the year immediately preceding the famine. But the anxiety of the government continued to be acute. And on the eve of the famine, the government of Ireland was admittedly a military occupation. And the garrison of Ireland was larger than the garrison of India. How do you govern it? Demanded Macaulay in the House of Commons in February 1844. Not by love, but by fear. Not by confidence of the people in the laws and their attachment to the Constitution, but by means of armed men and entrenched camps. And then these are some of the conditions that were known in Ireland. And, they sent, on the eve of the famine, they had this Nassau senior. They sent this commission into Ireland to see what was going on. And, they reported that things were pretty bad. But this is 1844, after, 43 years of free trade policy. And already in 1824, they had sent a commission in. And, the unemployment was just incredible. Like 2.4 million Irish adults, which was 60% of the labor force, outside of the short, potato farming season, right? They didn't work. 30 weeks out of the year, there was no work for them to do. So there was no wages, there was no accumulation of, wealth of anything. They were just totally destitute. But this is an account of what things were like. There never was, said the Duke of Wellington, a native of County Meath, a country in which poverty existed to the extent it exists in Ireland. Housing conditions were wretched beyond words. The census of 1841 graded houses in Ireland into 4 classes. The 4th and lowest class consisted of windowless mud cabins of a single room. Nearly half of the families of the rural population, reported the census commissioners, are living in the lowest state. In parts of the west of Ireland, more than 3/5 of the houses were one-roomed, windowless mud cabins, and west of a line drawn from Londonderry to Cork, the proportion was 2/5. Furniture was a luxury. The inhabitants of Tullahobagly, I'm not sure, County Donegal, numbering about 9,000, had, so 9,000 population in this county. In 1837, there was 10 beds in the county, 93 chairs, 243 stools between them. Pigs slept with their owners, manure heaps choked doors, sometimes even came inside. The evicted and unemployed put roofs over ditches, burrowed into banks, and existed in bog holes. And that actually, at a certain point during the famine, when people were being evicted, it became illegal for them to like dig these ditches and put covers over them. They were kicked out of the ditches. It was just like pure brutality. And then in addition to this, like in all of Ireland, for 8 million of a population, there was 39 hospitals. So, so 1845, you get this potato blight, and it's not really sure. I mean, you know, there are blights that hit before, I think like in 1817 and sometime late in the 1700s. So this was not like some uncommon thing. But all of a sudden, the entire crop was wiped out. That had not happened before. And immediately, a proposal was put forward by a subject of Ireland, but a leading one, Henry Drummond, that to deal with this this food shortage, that there would be a ban of all export on corn, a ban on grain distillation and fermentation, a removal of duties on food imports so that the Irish could get cheaper food, that you would create public works, especially rail infrastructure, harbor infrastructure, drainage of bogs so that you could, till, more land. These are all, normal things that you might do. You think about what FDR did in the 1930s. Yeah. You would establish relief committees, and you'd pay for these relief committees by a tax on landlords. And if they were absentee landlords, it would be 20 to 50% tax. If they were there, it would be a 10% tax. And then this guy Drummond and this committee also said, well, we could also take a 10-year loan out from Britain for £1.5 million, and we'll, put up the Irish hardwood forests for security. So the British government of Robert Peel just completely rejected all these proposals except removing the duties on the corn, on the imports of corn, which was a whole other operation going on in Britain. And let me read to you some of the quotes of these guys.
Corn meant wheat.
Well, I'm not sure. It might have, but in some of the literature they say corn, wheat, barley, but it might have just been a general term. I know they talk about Indian corn, which was actually like maize corn, which was a little different, but so this is in the midst of, this is 1846, the first potato crop failure. And it's after the recognition that this is not just in some parts, this is not just a blight like has been experienced before, but it's the total potato crop. And these proposals are put forward. And the Prime Minister of England ignored all but the second one on the import tariffs. And they said that, well, they said that this is Trevelyan, who was the head of the Treasury. So the only way to prevent people from becoming habitually dependent on government is to bring these relief operations to a close. The uncertainty about the new crop only makes it more necessary. These things should be stopped now, or you run the risk of paralyzing all private enterprise and having this country on you for an indefinite number of years. So basically, the entire intention, all the excuses of the British government at the time were that we can't buy food for the Irish people because that'll interfere with the market prices of private grain sellers. We can't do any type of public works that would give employment to these poor Irish people so that they could actually buy food, because that would be giving Ireland an unfair advantage in a market. I mean, this is all while like millions of people are starving. And you have to ask yourself, this idea of free trade, was it just, did they really just believe these ideas of free trade? Like, were they really just being loyal, or was this a conscious intention? I mean, you look at this idea today of the biofuels and 40% of corn going to ethanol. And I forget what committee it was in. I don't know, maybe Daniel knows. Where, was it from the EPA? The guy at the EPA is asked. He's asked, some official from the EPA is asked, well, like, are there any provisions in this biofuels mandate for when, there's food scarcity that the proportion of grain that has to go into these biofuels can be reduced? We could deal with he said, no, not that I know of. There's nothing like that yet. It's what you're facing here with the system that's in place, like the WTO, from Roosevelt's day and up through Kennedy, you had this idea of food surplus, grains. All that was wiped out by the WTO, because if these countries are going to trade together, then they can't have surpluses on hand for when prices go up, because then that's like an artificial interference with the markets. If a country has surpluses to release and feed their people, then they're not going to have to buy food at whatever prices exist. And that's going to be an artificial interruption of the markets. So where the intention after World War II was to make sure that there would never be hunger on the planet. These green revolutions, agricultural development in the third world. All that stuff's largely been wiped out in the name of free trade and market efficiency. Now, did people not know what was going to happen with that? Did the people that pushed these things through the WTO not know what the danger was that you're setting yourself up for? So, I mean, Americans have to know. They have to realize once again what we're fighting. That there's an intention to depopulate this planet. There's an intention to kill you. These are not just nice economic theories. And the way you bring this stuff down is Glass-Steagall. So,
Great. I thought now might be a good time for questions. If you want to take any questions. Or just discussion generally.
What are like the direct consequences of like if we actually do Glass-Steagall? What's that going to do like directly?
Well, immediately it would cause massive panic within Wall Street and the city of London, because it would just, like, the standard is set that the basic idea is you separate the banks, right? Commercial and investment banking. But quadrillions of dollars worth of derivatives and things that are right now the substance of the financial system, the claims that people have, the make-believe wealth that is there and given credence to, it would disappear, it would collapse. And these institutions would shut down. Many of the Wall Street banks would just shut down. But, so and this is the argument against it. This is why, like, Wall Street lobbyists are coming in and saying you can't even talk about Glass-Steagall, because just if people think you're talking about it, it's going to cause panic. Well, no, it would. We're going to shut the system down. That's the intention. But you have to follow it up with an understanding of what the real American system is. And the idea of money is not a problem. We can create money. Like, that's a good thing. It's attacked a lot. Oh, you know, government just prints money whenever they want. Well, no, that can be bad if you're doing it for something stupid. But if you're doing it according to Hamilton and, you know, how FDR did it, an understanding of this American system, it's crucial. We're going to have to recapitalize the system with we're going to spend a lot of money. We're going to print a lot of money immediately in the form of credit and inject it into the economy as the mobilization of, you know, major infrastructure projects, the WAPA, which we didn't go into much, but panic will be despair, cries, shrieks as we close the door to hell and send Wall Street. We'll dampen the cries.
One of the ways that they got rid of extra food storage, surpluses, we had the Billy Solestes scandal, and this guy was accused of, you know, he was in part of the grain storage program of surpluses and other stuff that was generated, and the free trade people and the farm and the commodities people said this guy was interfering with free trade. But besides that, the scandal was propagated on his alleged mishandling of the facilities that he provided for the storage of the grain. Billy Solestes. This goes way back in my memory. But when they did this, it was a deliberate maneuver, and you had a lot of the surplus agriculture that had been generated was disposed of or put onto the open market or different things done. But the point is, the facilities were eliminated. Now, these were facilities that were holding grain and other commodities as products for, you know, in case of an emergency like a flood condition or something like that, they would have grain to release onto the marketplace so that people could be fed, or, you know, bread could be made in bread bakeries, etc., etc. You know, and the Billy Solestes scandal was a deliberate strike at the surplus, and part of the arguments that were made were free enterprise arguments when they did this.
There was also a lot of that surplus grain sold to the Soviet Union. They had their grain shortages in the 70s, or, you know, during the Cold War.
Yeah, they
So
brought
it
that
served a
into,
good,
there
it was
was
a
a
very
number
good
of things.
diplomatic purpose. 'Cause,
I just,
Yeah, Howard.
just had a funny exchange this week after I got my email to contact my assemblyman.
Actually, I got that email, I have it with me. Is
Oh,
there a chance we could say that for the last section?
Oh, yeah.
Because we definitely need to report back on that.
Oh, yeah.
But I would just say in response to that, I mean, look, every single mechanism is being used to destroy us.
Yeah.
Every single policy that Obama's put in has been intended to destroy us. Look at Congress this week. Our Congressman Scott Garrett, he introduced a bill, right, that they just voted on. You got it. You got it, Fred. In terms of there's a seat over here. Okay, Marianne, you can come sit next to Jessica when you get the chance. But Scott, next to Jessica when you can. Scott Garrett, he introduced a bill that means that they're going to deregulate derivatives further. These are essentially derivatives held by foreign arms of a U.S. bank. That these are going to be further deregulated, and there were 300 congressmen that voted for it. Now,
Crowley.
yeah, including Crowley. Do you have the list, or do you know it off the top of your head?
Mung.
Yeah, Mung did.
Crowley, Israel.
Israel.
Some of our best friends.
Yeah, right.
We're old friends.
Yeah. People who know better. LaRouche's response was, "This is stinking cowardice. It's nothing but that. It's just flat out cowardice." Which is why I'd say that one of the crucial things. The question is, part of the point of going through these case studies is to show people we know where it's going, and the shift of the recent week has to include this thing I'm trying to report to you from Albany. The young people I spoke to, the aides, right? The young people Suzanne and myself and Robert and Bruce spoke to, they said, and they were different. They said, yes, Snowden did this. A 29-year-old. And they said, and what happens is it clicks. It should click. It's not going to get any better. It's only going to get worse until there is a systemic change. And the systemic change is from empire to American system. There's no other way to do it. There's no halfways. That's why you need a full programmatic response. Glass-Steagall, the credit system, NWAPA, is a single program, a single concept of the American system revival. And it can't be this and that and the other. Because any inch that you give them, they're going to pull off scandal here, scandal there, scandal there. They have. If you try to get into a war of predicates, then you're gone. If it's on any single issue, you're going to be overwhelmed. But it's the power of principle that is our weapon. And principle is what will save humanity. It's a principled action. It's a question of whether a cadre of people intend to make a species leap. If you've been listening to LaRouche recently with the recent paper, the question is, there's actually, if you have the courage to confront creativity per se, to look at your own humanity from the highest picture, from the highest order that is, if you have the courage to do so, then as a human you can make a willful leap to become an individual of a different quality, to be the genius that history demands today. And it's not something that's like a matter of aggregates. It's not something that like day by day I'm going to get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. There's a process. It's not defined by some event. It's not defined by something like Snowden said this. There's a natural process where I realized, read the interview, natural process where I came to this action. It wasn't that I woke up one day and I decided to do this. So there's a sort of an irony here that's challenging, right? On the one hand, the human individual makes this creative leap that's defined not by some sort of clock time as we know it. It's something that's different. But on the other hand, it's a process. So it's both sort of, I think that's a crucial paradox to try to discover, because it's not like you can wait and say, well, maybe tomorrow I'll wake up and I'll like have the inspiration and I'll do it. Maybe tomorrow I'll make the creative leap, right? I bet. I'm kind of tired this week. Maybe on Monday I'll become a revolutionary individual. That's not how it works. But on the other hand, there is this leap whereby you go from one quality of action to another quality of action that is categorically different, because you're actually fighting on principle. I think that's and in that sense you're living your life in a way that is as though escaped from the prison of clock time. You get to step onto the stage of world history. and then you leave behind your sense perceptual, what you think of as being your identity. Because you have to confront the fact that my identity is defined by the effect on the future generations of what I do today. And then you get to drop a lot of your ego, and you get to lose a lot of the, but it takes this tremendous will and fight and genius. It takes what LaRouche said last night. It takes guts and it takes brains. And we know it's kind of an ironic statement from him because he doesn't mean the brain. He means it takes, this quality that MacArthur had of knowing the flank and going for it, and you don't let up until you win. And I think that's what Scott is referring to here, particularly in terms of knowing your enemy. If you don't know, if you think to yourself, even if you were to think to yourself, my problem is the Queen of England, you're upside down. You're going to lose it, because when she dies, there's going to be someone else. It's not the Queen. It's not Obama. It's not the Queen. It's the oligarchical system.
If Glass-Steagall goes into effect, how would the British Empire and the Wall Street and the derivatives be shot down? Would they all be shot down in one lump blow, or would it go in stages, successive stages?
I don't totally understand all the mechanisms. I think they would just, like the market value of these things, no one would buy them. The derivatives.
So it would be like going into effect immediately, or?
I don't know. Maybe there's a certain relation to the process that Daniel's describing as like a process and a jump. Like there might be a couple of days where people are scrambling, but probably pretty immediately. It'd be pretty apparent immediately that.
Well, if you reflect.
And I would also like to say that I don't believe we should abandon sense perception entirely. I believe
We've had this
sense
discussion.
perception
We've had this
should go
discussion.
hand
You've
in
seen.
hand with
We've had this fight.
with being creative.
Yeah, but the
They
point,
should both
I didn't
go
say sense
hand in
perception,
hand.
we're talking about sense certainty. There's a difference. It's whether you think that sense perception is all there is. And
No, I
when exactly. So don't misunderstand me, okay? Because I hear you. I really do, but that's not the idea, okay? All right, so but furthermore, I'm actually going to address that when we talk about Amsterdam here in a minute, okay? So, but Marcel, did you want to add something?
That other word
Yeah, I
you
think
said
it's-
since what?
Certainty.
Certainty. Thank you.
I think it's just important when we're thinking about these things to think about in terms of Glass-Steagall, and in terms of how you have the Glass-Steagall Act, which would mandate bankruptcy organization of the country, which then, of course, would mandate infrastructure, industry, agriculture, science drivers, public works projects, so forth. We have the model right there. And if anyone tells you, well, those were the, you hear this a lot, those were the old days.
Yeah.
Things don't work like that anymore. Well, no, you just think about it. The physical universe works the same way. You drop something in the air, it'll still fall down. It won't fall up. And that's an example of a physical principle. You have principles in politics. You have principles in government, in society, cause and effect the same way, that work exactly the same way. Yes, there are certain minor fringe things that are extenuating that you would have to account for, but the basic principles, the basic lump sum of the policy is the same thing. So to talk about maybe what Eugene posed and some other people might be thinking about, well, you would have auditors immediately that would go into the banks, and what would they do? They would sit down, and however many days it took, they would say, okay, this amount of asset that you're claiming, is this, okay, this is an actual loan to a farmer that he's using to buy seed, buy crops, build another barn, whatever it is. Okay, that's a legitimate loan. That's something that's adding to the actual productivity of the country. There's a directionality in that loan that's going to provide something for the future, so that's good. Now this here, you're claiming as an asset. Well, this was bundled from, say, the British Barings Bank, and it's because of leveraging from some fictitious, we don't even know, some kind of profit on a stat sheet from some company that they claimed in profits. Well, that doesn't have a directionality to help anyone in any way, so that's just wiped off. And then at the end of that, you say, here's what the bank's assets really are, here's what's wiped off, and then you say, is it determined on the principle of Glass-Steagall that this bank is going to be in the best interests of the future directionality of this society, physically productive, to exist or not. If it's yes, then we capitalize that bank, we help it out with the loans it has and so forth that are for physical productive purposes, and if not, then you wipe that bank off. It's not anything that's going to help the future productivity of society, so we can do without it. Thank you. That's what you do, right?
I think that's an excellent description of it.
Yeah.
That's a great hold, one moment if you would. I mean, that I often, if you want to put it into a single sort of image, I think that I often return to this idea of what is on the front page of the New York Times and the process that Marcel just described. You would literally have these beautiful pictures that would be of a horde, just a straight army of auditors flowing into the banks. Just like you would see pictures, because it's going to take hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of auditors to do this. But they're going to go in, and it's going to say something like, America gains its freedom from bankers' dictatorship.
I get a picture of an auditor with a Wall Street banker looking over his shoulder, and he's going, "Oh, this is bad."
What do you want to say, Ron?
And this, what you're saying, doing today, if somebody says, oh, well, that was the old days, they did that in the 30s, right? You just tell them, turn around and tell them, listen, with the internet and computers, this can be done faster today than it was done in the 30s.
Well, I think
It could be done a lot faster, because the whole system, you wouldn't have to have, as you say, armies, because you would electronically enter the bank. And you just do it.
Now, but
and it can be done.
okay, but let's get to the higher principle on this, because we're not talking about that. That is mechanically what would. No, but that's what would proceed. But
people
no.
say it can't be done.
I know,
to him,
but they're
I'm
saying it can't.
mechanically
When
it
they're
can't be done.
Rod,
It can be.
when they're saying it can't be done, they're talking about what we're really addressing today. If the younger generation is not immediately reformed on the basis of returning to what Roosevelt did, if we do not return to that, then the younger generation is going to kill the country. That's what he said. We have a small window of time in which to train the young people who actually have the guts and the brains to become leadership to do the physical work. That's not going to be any easier than it was back in the 30s. It's going to be much harder. It's far worse in many senses. But it's going to take the leadership, because the issue is continually cowardice or guts. And the only way you can have guts is if you have, look, how does the cowardice define? People, it comes from a lack of forecasting, because people look into the future and they think, I could survive this. They think, you know what, I could probably come out on top. I run into people all the time who say this. I mean, we do a lot of organizing in Manhattan. We run into the Financial Times all the time, every single week, who say, yeah, but hyperinflation will be good for it'll be good for my business. They literally say that. They literally think that they're going to get away with it. But they don't realize, Diane made this beautiful point at the concert. I hope, almost everyone here was able to go, but please watch it and watch her speech, because she quoted from Frederick Douglass. She said, slavery, it kills the mind of the master and the slave. To be a slave master destroys your humanity. Right? So these people, they are not even aware of the fact that they think of themselves, in a sense, as property owners. Which is to say, I ran into a British banker. I said, Dodd-Frank is going to kill us. It holds up derivatives above the people. He said, well, I'm a derivatives man. So that's okay with me. I said, you're a genocidalist. He said, right on. He gave me a thumbs up. And when I'm quoting verbatim, right? Because he thinks he's going to get away with it. He thinks that somehow this thing will continue. So, why don't we transition to Amsterdam? Because this is a crucial sort of way to do that.
You won't know it's British.
Well, the Anglo-Dutch, same thing. All right, pull this up if you could. I only want to spend about 15 to 10 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes on this, because then we want to do some report backs. There's been crucial work done by Robert Bobrick and Jessica as well, but in particular on the New York City Council, an event that Robert went to recently. This is huge. There's a lot of work to be done immediately. We have until Thursday of this week to try to get the New York State Legislature to pass through the resolution. And there's been a lot of work done on that, so I want to have some time to report on that, to ask any questions that need to be done. So I'm just going to do a sort of a brief closing section and refer you to this. This is a chapter of Bob Ingram's book. Bob Ingram is one of our members in San Francisco, and I've been promoting this book across the organization as well. It is it's from a book called The Modern Anglo-Dutch Empire, Its Origins, I forget what the second thing is, and its anti-human outlook, okay? Because that's his beautiful polemic throughout the whole book. And very succinctly done. The anti-human outlook, because LaRouche made this point, he said last night, it's the essential question. The difference between man and the animals. What is the distinction between mankind and animals? How could he possibly say this is like the most important political question? The most essential political question. Someone, the average person we talk to would perhaps says, well, how could you, that's not the issue. But actually, when I reflect on the organizing recently in the streets, that's the best way to get to people immediately. Because who doesn't recognize that we're being treated like farm animals?
Sorry, do we have copies of the book here?
Unfortunately, I don't. I'd love to have them so I could, so everyone could get a copy. But I don't know that it was ever printed. It exists as a PDF, and I'll have to ask Bob Wester to mail it out to everyone. Anyway, but I'm in about the middle of it. I haven't been able to study it in depth, which I would have preferred to have done before this class. But I certainly hope that we can actually continue this topic. Because the point is, all right, people think they're going to survive it. Why? Because they do not believe in the future. What does that mean? It means they don't understand the essential distinction between mankind and the animals. An animal system has no way of actually creating something in the future. Animal systems don't work that way. An animal, if it wants to make a species leap, it's not voluntary. An animal, if it wants to make a species leap, it has to die out first, so that the next species, or in a sense, this is how it works if you look at the great extinctions, right? That you have like we looked at particular mollusks, right? You have a certain quality of mollusks that have this, or the cyanobacteria, exactly, where you have this certain, when Megan went through that, right? There's a certain type of cyanobacteria. It operates in a specific way. It reaches a certain boundary limit where it can no longer operate on those axioms, on those rules, right, of existence. It dies off, but in its place has been developing, and then all of a sudden blossoms upon the die-out, has been developing the new technology, so to speak, the new species, right? Or we look at like the dinosaurs and the mammals, right? So the dinosaurs, the mammals are a tiny percentage of the species generally. Around the time of the dinosaurs die out, and then up come the mammals, who just seem like a very just insignificant, probably only just really a small movement, not very many people, I bet. But anyway, and then but the dinosaurs die out, and the mammals rapidly dominate because they have the means to, because they operate on a higher level. They have a greater sort of like density of biogenic, say again? Energy flux density, right? They have a higher metabolism. They can do things that other things cannot. They can move around during the night. Absolutely. So they can control their own body temperature. Mm-hmm. And so they flourish. They do tremendous. They take over, right? All right. Now, what's the difference with mankind? We think. We use our minds.
Amen.
Okay. Amen. All right, so what is that?
Amen to that.
Amen to that.
We have a higher creator that made us that way. And that's the higher power that you're talking about? This-
Our mind is reflective of the creativity of the universe itself, of the creator, you might say.
All right,
Okay.
let's put it that way. We have
Oh.
to- I believe there is a creator.
We're on the same page, Marianne. We're talking about the same thing here. We really are.
Just,
So-
thank you.
But the question is,
If you don't,
there's
there's
a-
still a higher.
yeah, there's a
that's
creative
universal.
force.
Yeah.
There's a creativity inherent to the universe. It is developing. It is increasing in its development. Look at the history of life. Why does life go in this direction? More complex. Why does it do that? Why do we have this process of cephalization? This is really interesting, right? Where organisms get more and more and more over the course of their evolution heads. The head becomes not just heads, they get heads, but the head becomes the center of the activity. Right? So you think about like your hands. What do animals use their extremities for? You know, for eating, for helping the body as a whole. As they get more and more developed, like a monkey, they're able to use their hands to do things that have more to do with their head. You can pick things up and put it in your mouth, which a horse can't do, right? But then a human uses their hands to play a piano, which only serves the mind. It's not like, okay, they evolved for the purpose. Anyway, let's continue. The point is, I'm trying to convey something that LaRouche is really trying to get at in this paper. The human activity that you see reflected in the leadership of Franklin Roosevelt, in the leadership that we have from John F. Kennedy, right? That leadership, that is truly human. Because it works on this basis of creative leaps, of willful species jumps, where we say, well, we're going to do something that's going to transform everything. Because we create the idea first, we hypothesize it first, it exists first in your mind, and then we create it in the universe. And that's because of a physical understanding of space-time, of the universe, and the nature of the universe, and the nature of the future. Because now let me return to this. 1688. That's what Scott referenced, right? Everything that turned into the Irish potato famine was as a result of 1688. William of Orange goes up the Thames. The Dutch Empire. I guess that's a little. No, I guess that's right. Goes up the Thames. The Dutch Empire merges with the with the British system, right? And they create a single, united Anglo-Dutch empire that then proceeds to carry out the atrocities we referenced, right? And among many more that we talked about in terms of what's happening today under that system. It's the Anglo-Dutch system. So I wanted to give something to kind of spark people. Once again, the Dutch system is predicated on an idea that man is a beast and that the future is unknowable because man doesn't have a mind. They deny Paolo Sarpi, who creates this, he's a Venetian, who creates the whole idea. He really creates this ideology. He says there is no such thing as human reason. There's only sense perception. Okay? So he says that's all there is. Therefore, by means of enforcing that as an empire of the mind upon the population, you get them to believe that wealth is located in money. Because they believe that wealth is coins I can hold in my hand. Of course it's value. Look, I can touch it, I can feel it. It's real. It's real value. Or, that's one way of looking at it. But further, then you take it a step further, and in Amsterdam, in the period right as they were creating this merger, Amsterdam was the leading financial center of the world. Okay? and they created for the first time the financial derivatives that define the gambling system that defines Wall Street today. Okay, this is where they first created. This is the incredible gambit, where you get someone to believe that merely by shuffling money around, you can create wealth. That by it's this beautiful game where I can win if I just play it right. Then if I can win, we can create money, and therefore we can create value. Okay, that is the essential question. That defines the empire, is that you get people to believe this, right? And we have to crush it. Okay, so I open up with this is a great little quote at the beginning of it.
It's like the Dutch tulip.
It's like the tulip bubble. We're talking about the Dutch East India Company, the Dutch West India Company, and the British East India Company, who in this time period created a merger whereby any given day there were massive shipments of financial contracts going back and forth between London and Amsterdam, right? As soon as they moved to London, all of a sudden you have a maritime empire. You have this massive naval capability. But it starts with the Dutch, who create this system of speculation.
1688, right?
1688 is key year. And in fact, there's a quote from here, from 1688. If one were to, this is from a guy, Joseph de la Vega, who was, Bob doesn't tell us much about him, but he was a Sephardic Jew in Amsterdam, and he wrote this whole, this document that's a major source of our knowledge of how the speculative system worked. And it's a dialogue between a speculator and a broker and blah, blah, blah. And he says, if one were to lead a stranger through the streets of Amsterdam and ask him where he was, he would answer, among speculators. For there is no corner in the city where one does not talk shares. Right? It's just speculation. Now, I want to turn, I think I want to turn to the next page. He's gone through the development of the Antwerp Bourse, which is the word, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but it's the word that means stock exchange. Because in the Netherlands, before the Venetian system moved in, before you had massive oligarchical money move in, even before that, you had the first stock exchange. Okay? And this is a huge operation because it's been done it's been imposed upon an area, the Netherlands, that had a great republican opportunity. In Erasmus, who was a tremendous fighter for humanistic ideas, for the Renaissance concepts, in the Brotherhood of the Common Life. This is the very system out of which Nicholas of Cusa comes. It means that you have these people who, coming out of the collapse of Europe in the bubonic plague, these monks who are committed to the idea we're going to take young, impoverished people, just serfs, essentially, the children of slaves, and we're going to raise them, and we're going to give them a new education, a classical education, a Platonic education, right? And out of that came Joan of Arc. Out of that came Nicholas of Cusa. There was a major amount of force of the Brotherhood of the Common Life within the Netherlands. Okay, so similarly you have Rembrandt, right? One of the greatest humanist painters that the world has ever seen. So there was a huge potential, tremendous potential, and they crush it. They totally crush it with speculation, with the imposition of a financial system that is designed as a gambling house, right? And what did I want to get to?
Well, what was
Maybe return to me.
All right, 1688 was what they call in the history books the Glorious Revolution.
Yes, right.
Supposedly gave Britain their democratic rights.
Sure. Yeah.
And then where between Rembrandt was, and the Pilgrims lived in Holland too, before they had safe haven there, before they came to the United States. I don't know about the Puritans, but the Pilgrims. And then that was in the 1620s and so on. And then what happened what generated that that transformation between,
Mm-hmm.
1620s, 30s,
Mhm.
and Rembrandt lived around that, I don't know.
I have to be honest, I don't know his time, exact years.
You know, what generated that transition?
Well, here's how I understand it. And like I said, I'm only working through this book. But I'm doing it from the standpoint of what LaRouche said last night and his whole polemic on the Anglo-Dutch, right? And I think that's how we got to do it. Here's how I understand it from the work that I've read from Bob Ingram. Essentially, over the course of that period, the Dutch, basically the Venetian oligarchical system, the Venetian families, 3 of the 5,000 families that defined the oligarchy, that had the family fondi, the huge banks that would enslave whole states on the basis of these massive usurious loans, right? They move into Amsterdam, and there's a guy named William the Silent who resisted a push by the Spanish to come into the Netherlands, right? William the Silent was actually of the House of Orange, but he was one who actually would have, as I understand it at the moment, would have looked towards a republican future, right? But then he gets crushed, and in comes essentially families that achieve a total domination of the world slave trade, of the African slave trade. These are the people who first get African slaves into North America, for example, and it's through that domination of trade. I mean, Amsterdam, although they weren't this maritime empire that the British were, they were the biggest port in Europe, as I understand it.
But they were American.
Still is.
They were American.
Yeah, what I mean is not to the extent that the British became,
Yeah.
but they were the greatest port, so they had this massive control over the trade of commodities, over the trade of etc., but over the trade of slaves, but emphatically over specie, over financial contracts as well, and that's what developed. Is all of a sudden you had this explosion of speculation where all these people believed that they were somehow engaged in something that was creating wealth, but they were really, engaged in the creation of this massive empire. And the distinction is that this is the beginning of the European central banking system as we know it, because before, the Lombard bankers had actually, as I said, they basically enslaved states, right? Or by loaning them money and blah blah blah, and getting usuriously and loaning them money and getting a massive tribute as a result, so that they would have to turn over like the whole cotton production of wool production of Britain. We're going to have to turn the whole thing over because of how much money we owe to the bankers. Right now, the distinction is that in Amsterdam, they created the Bank of Amsterdam, where you had a public bank, all right, which is it's not a national bank, all right. It's here we go. Okay, I want everyone to turn, and we're going to have to just wrap up here, unfortunately, because we don't have much more time. But that's why I brought this, so people could at least read this chapter, because it's quite interesting. But if you go to under banking and money, and you go to the part that says, from a technical standpoint, it's the third paragraph up. From a technical standpoint, the single most important banking invention in Amsterdam was that of central bank money, which is often described as the foundation of modern central banking systems. This developed around the notion of a unit of account, establishing a relationship of bank money, the privately issued notes of the bank, to specie, with the value of the bank money eventually becoming the actual legal unit of account and the basis for the final settlement of all contracts and accounts. Any contract you want to do, any account you want to settle, you have to go through the Bank of Amsterdam, right? When the Wisselbank ended the right of specie withdrawal in the 1680s, the ascendancy of fiat bank money was complete. The financial paper of the central bank was legally the official money of the realm, so to speak. What this did was to institutionalize a system whereby the power of money replaced any concept of the common good as the governing principle of society. It also took the power over currency and credit out of the hands of the sovereign government. The issues involved are not technical, they are axiomatic. This concept of the preeminence of money is at the heart of the modern system of central banking. It is a system based on money, usury, and debt, where both the people as well as the government are controlled through the central bank's power over money and debt. The purpose of the debt is not to finance physical economic development for the benefit of the common good, but to perpetuate the wealth and governing power of the financial oligarchy. And he continues, by the second half of the 17th century, the Wisselbank had amassed an enormous concentration of financial power, which gave them the ability to expand the empire and finance wars on a scale never before seen. So, and then what you have, and then in the following chapter, which I found to be extremely interesting was, or the following section, speculating, and it goes through how in this period they created forward contracts, futures contracts, options contracts. This is actually a really good primer, because when you see these things in the very basic primordial form, you can have a better sense of what they are today. It's just all bullshit. It's all bullshit. There's nothing to it. It's just nonsense. It's just a way to control people by getting them obsessed with the idea of their success in a gambling system. And then
that's exactly what the plan is now.
Yeah.
Exactly the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So Wall Street is the new Amsterdam. And that's why we got to crush it. And we know the enemy, and we know the weapon, and what's incumbent upon us is to take on the intention. You are not engaged in a fight to restore a Glass-Steagall. It's not what we're doing. It is not it at all. Of course we're going to have to do that. But that's not what we're doing. What we're engaged in is a fight for the new paradigm, which is a humanist renaissance. The only thing that is above all of, the only thing that subsumes the whole thing is, what is your image of mankind? Is man a beast, or is man an animal? I mean, is man a beast, or is man creative? Right? Because if man is just a beast, then you can just gamble his future away. And that's if man is then we're just going to die. I mean, that's it. We're just going to lose everything. We've reached the point. We're living under a thermonuclear system. When World War breaks out today, it means extinction. You know, when you have 1923 style hyperinflation, it means literal potential, dark age, which in this moment, the rapid collapse. I mean, if we have imagine if we have a humongous financial disintegration of the type that will happen if we do not fight, you're telling me you don't think that the nuclear weapons are going to go off? In the event of a massive, absolute hyperinflationary blowout of the global of the transatlantic and therefore global monetary system? That's the existential threat that we're in. And that brings the point on Obama. You pull out Obama, you pull out the empire's puppet, you pull out the controller in the United States, the decider on this. You pull out their insane mannequin. And that's a moment we're in right now. We're talking about this week, next week, the following. If something, it's just prepare yourself for the actual species jump that is required of you. Because the point I just want to make again and again, it's not going to get any better. Forget it. It's not getting any better. It's only going to get worse until we get Glass-Steagall. You can't live your life on the basis of like some kind of schedule. It's coming crashing down on us, and it's our power and our unique gift that we can stop it. We can save this thing. Only 3 or 4 people in the world knew this up until this point in time. Only a few people, myself, Mr. LaRouche, and a couple of other people who had to know. At the same time that LaRouche made his famous April 11th, 2009 webcast saying Obama is a Hitler, Obama is an Emperor Nero, at the same time that he said that, there was a parallel identification, a psychological assessment of the president that said clinically, agreed clinically with what Mr. LaRouche said. Because the whole point is that he's a malignant narcissist. So that's someone who cannot think from the standpoint of another person. It's like impossible for them to imagine what it would be like to be another person. They only see themselves everywhere. And further, the point of being a malignant narcissist is that they hate themselves. And you can see this. I mean, everyone has seen it, but you can really see it in Obama's mannerisms. And he goes up there and he'll say something that is just totally brutal and disgusting, and he hates himself for it. So he said the intelligence community, some faction within the intelligence community, already came to the same conclusion in April of 2009. So this Jeff used to frame the situation with the scandals. Because here's the concatenation of scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal that are hitting Obama left and right and up and down. And it's not a coincidence. This is a coordinated effort by figures within the patriotic institutions of the presidency, because there are people in the United States government, in the institutions, the military, etc., the intelligence community, who do have a patriotic response. And if you go back to the 1970s, these people picked up LaRouche as a thinker, as a creative mind, because they saw that his outlook was that of Roosevelt and Kennedy. These are people who were defined by their, for example, in the military, by their love and respect for MacArthur, right? By the fact that they recognize if we had listened to MacArthur, if Kennedy had not been killed, we wouldn't have gone into the Vietnam War, and we would have escaped the whole situation in many respects, right? If Kennedy had survived, we would have actually crushed the empire by those policies. So over the past recent period, Obama gets reelected. These guys who thought somehow perhaps we could escape this, somehow, because this is the whole problem that LaRouche continually points out to us, that people can't forecast what's going to happen, so they think, well, but I could get through this, or the country can get through this. It's like, let's just see what happens. Maybe we can get Romney in, and he's more controllable. Whatever it is that they thought, right? But he specifically said that a faction of people who are against his reelection are acting. So they act. I mean, I don't need to enumerate the scandals. There's really no point doing that. But the point is that we have reached a boundary condition. Obama can no longer boss around everyone this way and that in the Congress and threaten them and blackmail them, because he's lost credibility. Now, this week there was a press conference held, and at this press conference you had the ACLU, Rand Paul, a whole swath of other Republican congressmen, Tea Party types, many of them, right? And Bruce Fein, who I'd say probably everyone here, with maybe a couple of exceptions, has seen speak publicly at a LaRouche event, right? Or at least you've seen the video, right? Bruce Fein, who's spoken at Schiller Institute conferences at least 3-4 times now over the past year, going back to, over the past 6 months, really, going back to January. And then, of course, he was involved with our press conference back on Benghazi, right? So the situation here is that we have a core of people who come together at this press conference to announce that it's not politics, it's principle, to announce the spying is indicating this is not unconstitutional, this is anti-constitutional. Bruce Fein raised the fact that we waged, and much of the revolution was much of the construction of the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, was created because of the very general warrants that Obama is using today, and that Bush used, right? Well, I can just look at everyone's information, because you can trust me, just trust me. I know, you can. Don't worry, I'm just going after the bad guys. Okay, so they moved this week. Now, who else was at this press conference? John Conyers. So in the Senate, so John Conyers, for anyone who might not know, is the most senior member of the Congress, as I understand it. Consider what's going on with the ethanol. This is just as an aside, really, because it's crucial, but let's just address it momentarily. 40% of our corn is going into the gas tanks. All right. So, first of all, what is the result of that? Well, there's about 1 billion people on the planet who are hungry. All right. The amount of corn that we turn into ethanol could be immediately transformed to food. It could be used as food, and we could feed 400 million people with it. This are calculations that Dennis Mason has done recently. So then you have to ask yourself, well, why on earth are we doing it? And there was a reference to this last, maybe 2 weeks ago. We were at a hearing where the EPA was, Obama's EPA was commenting. And a congressman said, well, at what point, when the food crisis gets so bad, what point do you plan on issuing a waiver on the biofuels requirements? And a response from the EPA, at what point in time would you lift the biofuels requirement and allow that food to be used as food? Right? And the response was, well, we don't have a plan. There was never a plan. There's not a plan. So what's the intention? The intention is genocide. It's starvation. It's death. It's famine. It's not famine caused by circumstance, by natural disasters, by climate change. It's man-made. It's man-made murder. Now take a moment and reflect that the Congress knows it. The Congress, and the exit sign is flashing. Impeach, impeach, impeach. All right? Why? Why is that such a crucial move? All right, well, who in the room happened to be able to be on the Monday night call that Jeff Steinberg made or listen to it later? This was the emergency conference call. I know Bruce got to listen to it. James, you're on it? Okay, very good. I strongly urge everyone to listen to it. It has been sent out to you as an MP3 form, so you can look in your email from Bob Wesser, I expect, or perhaps from Stu Rosenblatt, if you have access to your email. If you have any other issues on that, I'm sure we can find another way. In fact, it's on the LaRouche PAC website. So if you can access the LaRouche PAC website and you search for Jeffrey Steinberg briefing of, what was the date? Monday the 10th, June 10th. Then you'll be able to listen to it. It's about an hour, a little bit longer. But he opens with this tremendous revelation. He said, are now those people who are generally gutless, and you see repeatedly with vote after vote after vote in the Congress, you have a gutless Congress, a gutless wonder assembly, not a Congress. And if we cannot now, at this point, turn the tide away from what has happened since Franklin Roosevelt died, if we can't turn that tide now, mankind may be finished. And that's what I'm concerned about. And I know I make no mistake, I make no exaggeration in any degree on this issue. I'm right. And anybody who thinks I'm not right, they're wrong. So, I want to think about what he's talking about in terms of the younger generation. Think about, because here's what we have presented before us. Pearl Harbor has been hit. All right, it's already been hit. And it's right now that people have got to be responding on that nature. LaRouche often talks about how he was in New York City on the day after Pearl Harbor, and how he saw people that the mobilization in the streets was that all of a sudden a light went off, and people who had, like himself, who had really not intended to become a part of the fight, decided in that moment, as if simultaneously, we've got to move to preserve the nation state, to preserve humanity, and thinking about the world as a whole. Because that was the identity, and that's the identity that that must be forged. But this is really interesting because that's not necessarily what could have been. That generation was defined by what Roosevelt did beginning in his first 100 days with Glass-Steagall. They were known as the lost generation. People who had no hope because of the Great Depression. And they were turned. They were transformed, right? So, and they became the people who fought fascism. And won and defeated what could have been a Nazi system across the world, and that's what we're faced with today. Last Friday, LaRouche said, impeach Obama or face overt dictatorship. This is Nazi dictatorship. That's not even adequate at all. Right now, there is genocide taking place on the planet, and Obama's at fault. And anyone who thinks it's not happening, it better get their head out of the ground, because all you have to do is look at Haiti. And we're going to go into that. There's some very striking things on this that everyone should know. Consider the I want to just open the conversation by addressing, like, once again, this incredible, like, just ticklish irony to the comparing the people who are here right now, the small number of people in the room, right? The small number of people in the movement, because out of like full-time organizers, there's probably only about 200 of us, less than that even. There are a lot of people who organize with their all the time they have, but they also have to work, right, in order to support themselves. So in terms of Mr. LaRouche's movement, there's just a few hundred people, a few hundred souls that are really closely connected to this mission, all right? And yet, we intend to destroy the system of empire. We intend to destroy the British Empire. And that is the only way it's going to work. You can't talk about it any other way. You can't say, okay, well, I intend to fix the food crisis, or I'm intending to prevent the war from happening, or I intend to reverse the financial crash. None of that is going to work. None of it. Because it only is going to function if there's a cadre of people. It's going to start very few, in particular from the younger generation, who can grasp what Lynn said last night about the fact that, this is what I was referring to, Bill. Let me actually begin it. And you don't need to turn to these yet, but later on I'll be using them. I'm going to read from what we're going to end with, so there's a certain poetic quality to the discussion today. These were the final comments from LaRouche last night. Here's the big problem. We have a degeneration, a moral, intellectual degeneration of the population of the United States, so that if we don't get the United States back now, the young generation coming up now will destroy the nation anyway. That's the issue. You have to do it, because if you keep this policy going on what's allowed, look, the people who were my age as a young man, they don't exist anymore to speak of. And the younger ones who aren't in that category aren't fit to lead, except very rare cases of people who actually have the guts and brains to do what's necessary. Most of our members of Congress are cowards, stinking cowards. They have no depth of commitment at all. What we have now, they